Most people had never heard of the ICD, the Integrated Contamination Division, and that was exactly how they wanted it. They had been around for as long as anyone could remember, quietly erasing the world's loose ends, the things that didn't make sense, that didn't belong. These anomalies were captured, locked away, and forgotten. Officially, the ICD handled biological hazards and experimental preservation. Unofficially, they specialized in making the impossible disappear. One of their employees had learned early on not to ask questions. Facility 112 wasn't their first assignment, but it was the last. Places like that weren't for the curious. It was a simple job, suited for someone who knew how to keep their head down. Anyone working for the ICD learned to accept the strange. They heard rumors, stories of living shadows, creatures with too many teeth, entities that vanished when looked at directly. Curiosity was a liability. No one asked what was in the sealed containment units. They just followed protocol. Tucked away in an unremarkable location, Facility 112 housed the most dangerous and valuable specimens. The job was straightforward: keep people out and things in. This particular employee wasn't a scientist or an analyst, just a guard, someone who patrolled the halls, checked badges, and monitored security feeds. The day the anomaly arrived, the entire facility felt wrong. Usually, Facility 112 maintained an almost sterile quiet, but that day, an unshakable tension gripped the air, as if everyone was bracing for something terrible. The guard was stationed at a checkpoint when the transport team rolled through 8 figures in hazmat suits, wheeling in a massive containment pod. No one spoke. The silence wasn't just protocol, it was fear. Even the scientists, who typically treated their work like an intriguing puzzle, looked as though they wanted to be anywhere but there. The guard wasn't supposed to see what was inside. The job was to verify clearance, ensure the path to Containment Wing SE was clear, and move on. But for a moment, they hesitated, just long enough to catch a glimpse. It was enormous, at least 12 feet tall. Its wings, folded neatly against its body, shimmered like dark curtains shifting under the light. The texture was unnatural, like oil on water, an iridescent, shifting surface that defied easy description. Thick, dark fuzz coated its form, almost giving it a deceptively soft appearance. But its eyes were what lingered in the mind. They were vast, black, and unblinking, like staring into an abyss that stared back. The creature didn't move, not even when it was secured in the chamber. There was something unnatural about its stillness, something oppressive about its presence. The air around it felt heavier, suffocating. It was beautiful in a way that made the stomach twist, a beauty that did not invite admiration, only unease. Deep instinct warned that this thing did not belong, that it was wrong, but it was just another anomaly, another classified secret. That was the only way to get through the job. Pretend it didn't matter. Pretend it was just another day. But the moth was different. Even from a distance, it felt aware, as if it was waiting. It became impossible to ignore. While on patrol, the guard found themselves glancing toward Containment Wing C, anticipating something. A shift in the air, a flicker of movement, a sound. Nothing came. And yet its presence was relentless. Where did it come from? How had the ICD managed to capture something so massive, so alien? Against better judgment, the guard did the one thing they had promised themselves they wouldn't. They asked questions. The inquiries were cautious, whispered during late-night shifts to those who wouldn't report them. Most responses were dismissive, big wig orders, above my pay grade. But then came Henderson, a member of the transport team still stationed at the facility. He had been one of those who brought it in, and he liked to talk. "Do you really want to know?" he asked one night, his voice conspiratorial, low. The hum of vending machines was the only other sound in the break room. "This one's different. Came from deep in the Appalachia hillberry country. You wouldn't believe the mess they found it in." He didn't wait for an answer before continuing. Henderson never needed encouragement. "A couple of hillbillies caught it," he said, smirking as if the whole thing were a joke. "They found it just sitting there in their barn in the middle of the night. Can you believe that? As big as it is, just perched there, wings all folded up. Didn't move a muscle. They thought it was some kind of demon, chained it up and threw a tarp over it. Didn't even fight back. The guard frowned. It hadn't moved at all. Not once, Henderson confirmed. Not when they tied it up, not when they started poking it with sticks. They were trying to see if it was alive, you know. Even when we got there, it just sat there. The locals didn't know what to do with it. They claimed it was some kind of omen and said it showed up after the livestock started getting bigger. He hesitated. Bigger? How? Faster? Stronger? Muscles bulging? The farmers thought it was the feed or something, until the horses started disappearing. Then the family began acting strangely, refusing to leave the barn, only eating food from their own land. By the time the ICD arrived, they were half feral, dragging raw meat into the barn under the cover of darkness. The words stuck in his throat. And the moth? It had just let them take it, folding its wings neatly, as if it were cooperating. Henderson shrugged like it was nothing. Didn't resist, didn't make a sound. Weirdest damn thing I've ever seen. He said it so casually, but his words lingered, gnawing at the edges of thought. The creatures brought to Facility 112 were usually terrified or hostile. He had seen things thrash in containment pods, heard them screech and wail as ICD handlers wrestled them into their cells. But this was different. The moth hadn't been captured, it had surrendered. Why? The question hung in the air, and for the first time, Henderson's smirk faltered. His voice dropped to a murmur, his fingers tapping against his temple. Scrambled, he said, wiped clean like everyone else in that town. They don't remember a thing, they just think the horses ran off. No, I'm done. Typical ICD work. He started to press, but Henderson cut him off with a sharp shake of his head. Look, man, you're better off not knowing the rest. They handled it, okay? The locals, the farm, all of it. His gaze flickered toward the door, as if someone might be listening. Forget I said anything. He stood abruptly, brushing imaginary crumbs from his pants, and left the break room without another word. Silence settled over the empty chair he left behind. He wanted to stop thinking about it. He wanted to believe Henderson had exaggerated, or that it wasn't his problem. That night, sleep refused to come. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those endless black eyes staring back, unblinking, as if they already knew how this would end. Facility 112 always had the sterile chemical tang of bleach and burnt circuits. Most people stopped noticing it after a while. But lately, there was something else faint yet persistent. A metallic edge, sharp and clean, like the coppery taste of blood. It hung heavier in the corridors near Containment Wing C, subtle enough to ignore if one tried, but undeniable. Others noticed it too. He could see it in the way they hesitated just a second too long, their noses twitching, their eyes darting around as if searching for the source. Then they would shake it off, keep walking, keep pretending. He had worked at Facility 112 long enough to know that pretending only worked for so long. Other things felt off. Subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Wilson was the first. Loud, affable Wilson. The kind of man who filled silence with stories about his kids or the dock he was building at his lake house. But something had changed. He still talked, but his voice was different, steadier, more deliberate, stripped of excess, precise. And it wasn't just his voice. One day, Wilson hauled a crate of equipment that usually required 2 people. He carried it like it was nothing. When someone pointed it out, he smiled, but the look in his eyes was strange, like he was the one watching them. Feeling good lately, he had said, setting the crate down with a soft thud before walking away, his stride unnervingly smooth. Then there was Ramirez. She had always been sharp, but now there was an edge to her, something too controlled. One night, he encountered her in the corridor outside Containment Wing C. Normally, boots echoed against the concrete, but he hadn't heard her approach. She nodded as she passed. Their eyes met, and for a brief moment, it wasn't a look, it was an assessment. Even Henderson, the man who never shut up, wasn't the same. He still talked, but there was something behind his words now, a quiet intensity, a cold efficiency. When he spoke, he leaned in just a little too close, his words clipped and precise, like he was trying to convince without outright saying it. And then there was himself. He felt it too, not in the same way, not yet, but enough to make him uneasy. Every time he passed the observation window, he lingered, unable to resist glancing at the monitor feed. The moth never moved. It didn't have to. Its presence was enough. Its wings shimmered under the lights, the intricate patterns shifting ever so slightly. He knew it was watching, and somehow he knew it was waiting. They were alive, and those eyes, black, bottomless eyes, seemed to pull you in. If one looked too long... One night during a patrol, he heard voices low and urgent coming from the storage room near Containment Wing C. He paused outside the door, his heart hammering, and listened. Henderson and Ramirez. Their words were muffled but clear enough to make out pieces of their conversation. "You felt it, didn't you?" Henderson was saying, his tone sharper than usual. "It's like it knows you're there," Ramirez replied, her voice tight, almost breathless. "And when you're close enough..." She cut herself off, her words breaking into a low laugh. It wasn't the kind of laugh he had heard from her before. It was soft and warm, like she had just told a joke only she understood. "Don't fight it," Henderson said. "You've seen Wilson. He's better, stronger. You will be too." He stepped back, careful not to let his boots scrape the floor. Even a tiny squeak threatened to reveal his location. His chest felt tight, his pulse thudding in his ears. He didn't know what they were talking about. Not exactly, but it was enough to make him realize he wasn't imagining things. Something was happening. That night, he kept seeing Henderson and Ramirez walking down that corridor in perfect step, their faces calm but unreadable. It wasn't just strange, it was wrong in a way he couldn't put into words. His mind kept circling back to Henderson's words. "You've seen Wilson. He's better, stronger. You will be too, stronger." He had been trying to ignore it, but it was true. Wilson had changed. They all had. He kept replaying the moment Wilson lifted that crate like it weighed nothing, the way his movements were so smooth and almost efficient. It wasn't normal. None of it was. By the time his next shift rolled around, he had convinced himself to stay out of it. Whatever was going on, it wasn't his business. He had seen what happened to people who dug too deep at Facility 112. They didn't get answers. They just disappeared. He told himself to focus on the routine, patrol the halls, check the monitors, and keep his head down, nothing more. This is how it has always been. But it wasn't that easy. Not when the signs were there. Everywhere. His next shift started at midnight, and by then he was exhausted, the kind of tightness that makes you jump at shadows and second-guess every sound. His patrol route was the same as always, down the main corridor, past the labs, and then a sweep of Containment Wing C. He had started dreading that part of the route, but skipping it wasn't an option. The moth was always there, motionless behind the thick glass, its wings folded neatly against its massive body. It never moved, but the air in that corridor always felt heavier, like walking through water. The metallic tang was stronger there too, clinging to his skin long after he walked away. But tonight, something was different. He caught sight of Wilson again in front of the observation window to Containment Wing C. Wilson wasn't supposed to be there. His shift had ended hours ago. But there he was, staring into the chamber like he was waiting for something, his hands by his sides, fingers twitching slightly. He hesitated, watching Wilson from the end of the hall. For a moment, he thought about calling out to him, but before he could, Wilson turned and walked into the chamber, his steps quick and purposeful, as though he had known he was there the whole time. He followed Wilson. He knew he shouldn't have, but something about the way Wilson moved was so deliberate, so precisely pulled him in. Wilson didn't stop until he reached one of the storage rooms. The door clicked shut behind him. He crept closer, lingering in the shadows. As he peered through the observation window of the moth's chamber, he froze. Inside, the lights were dim, casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. Henderson, Ramirez, and Wilson stood in a loose circle around the moth. Its wings shimmered faintly in the low light, the intricate patterns appearing to ripple as if alive. He should have turned back. He should have called it in, but he felt rooted to the spot. His breath caught in his chest as he watched Wilson step closer to the moth. Each movement was slow, deliberate, almost graceful. Wilson reached out, brushing his hand against the moth's thorax. For a moment, nothing happened. Then he saw it, a thick, golden droplet of liquid welling up from where Wilson's hand made contact. It clung to his fingers like honey, glistening in the dim light. Without hesitation, Wilson raised his hand to his mouth and drank. He bit down hard on his lip to stifle a gasp, his heart pounding in his chest. It felt loud enough to echo in the silence. Ramirez was next. She knelt before the moth, her head tilted back as she reached for another bead of that golden liquid. A look of bliss illuminated her face, and he felt his stomach churn, nausea rising as he watched. Henderson followed, stepping forward without a hint of hesitation. His movements were smooth and practiced, as if he had done this countless times before. When he drank, his body shuddered briefly, a ripple of something passing through him, and then he straightened, his expression eerily calm. For a moment they stood there silent, their heads bowed slightly. It resembled a ritual, something sacred. The moth remained still, unresponsive, as if it were the center of this dark, unsettling ceremony. It just was. The moth's stillness commanded more attention than any motion could have. He stepped back slowly, his head spinning and pulse racing, but he couldn't let them see him. If they knew he was there, he dreaded to think what they might do. Once he felt far enough away, he turned and hurried back to the break room, his hand trembling. Images flooded his mind of Wilson drinking from his fingers, Ramirez kneeling as if in prayer, Henderson's expression as calm as stone, and that golden, syrupy droplet glowing in the dim light. He sank into a chair, his thoughts racing. Whatever was unfolding in that room was far more than just a private moment. The moth wasn't merely sitting there, it was feeding them. Whatever it was giving them, it was transforming them. He felt paralyzed, unsure of what to do. Reporting it seemed futile. If the higher-ups weren't already aware, they would never believe him, and if they were, they would likely just erase him, as they had done with everything else that didn't fit their narrative. He glanced at the clock. It was just past 3 a.m. The rest of his shift dragged on, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had crossed an irrevocable line, that there was no turning back now. Whatever was happening in Containment Wing C was not going to stop, and part of him was uncertain if he even wanted it to. The next few days felt unbearable. He couldn't look at Henderson, Ramirez, or Wilson without seeing them kneeling before the moth in that chamber, their hands slick with that golden liquid. They no longer bothered to conceal it, not really. Wilson was hauling equipment meant for 4 men, his movements smooth and effortless. Ramirez carried a newfound intensity. Her eyes were sharper, her reactions quicker. Henderson had adopted a strange authority, his voice steady and commanding, as if he held secrets the rest of them didn't know. The changes weren't merely physical. They moved together now in unspoken harmony. No words, no signals, just a silent understanding that made his skin crawl. If one of them began to walk, the others followed instinctively. If one turned their head, the others seemed to know precisely where their gaze was directed. It was unnatural. The moth's chamber had become the center of their universe. They spent more time there, sometimes even during shifts they weren't scheduled for. No one dared to question it. Perhaps they didn't notice, or maybe fear kept them silent. He couldn't blame them. He didn't want to talk about it either. What frightened him most was the way they began to look at him. It started subtly, a glance that lingered too long, a slight tilt of the head as if they were studying him. Then it escalated. Henderson would brush past him in the corridor, locking eyes just long enough to send chills down his spine. Ramirez appeared during his shifts, leaning against the wall near the observation window, her attention fixed on him instead of the monitors. And Wilson smiled, but not the warm, easy smile he once had. It was something hollow, something unsettling. By the time he realized what was unfolding, it was too late to intervene. A little after midnight, the alarm blared, a low, droning sound indicating a breach in one of the containment chambers. He was halfway through his patrol when it began, the red emergency lights casting long, flickering shadows across the walls. His radio crackled with overlapping voices in chaotic disarray. Wing C compromised. Containment failure. He didn't need to hear more. He knew exactly where the breach was in the moth's chamber. He ran, his boots pounding against the floor, his chest tightening with every step. The corridor leading to Wing C was eerily empty. No guards, no technicians, no one responding to the alarm. The door to the moth's chamber stood wide open, and the reinforced glass observation window lay shattered. Inside, Henderson, Ramirez, and Wilson were no longer themselves. Their bodies had transformed. Their limbs were thicker, covered in a soft, dark fuzz that shimmered under the emergency lights. Their eyes had turned black, deep pools reflecting everything and nothing. Their movements were no longer just coordinated. They were precise, mechanical, like cogs in a well-oiled machine. The moth stood in the center of the chamber, its wings fully unfurled for the first time. They were massive, filling the space with patterns that shifted and rippled in a way that made his head ache just to look at them. Its long tongue extended, dripping that golden liquid and feeding into something at its feet, the cocoons. 3 of them, each the size of a person, wriggled faintly as the moth's tongue deposited more sap onto their surfaces. The air in the room felt thick, buzzing with an electric hum that made his skin crawl. He stepped back, his hand trembling. He didn't know what to do, run, hide, report it. But before he could decide, Henderson's head snapped toward him, his black eyes locking onto his. Ramirez and Wilson mirrored the movement, perfectly synchronized. For a moment, none of them moved. The only sound was the low hum of the moth's wings, a vibration that resonated deep within his bones. Then Henderson smiled, the same empty, knowing smile Wilson had given him days before. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and steady. "It's not your time." He didn't wait to discover what that meant. He turned and ran, his legs burning as he sprinted down the corridor, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Behind him, he could hear their footsteps perfectly in sync echoing through the empty halls. He didn't stop until he reached the security room. He slammed the door shut, fumbling with the lock, and turned to the monitor feeds. What he saw made his stomach drop. The cocoons were splitting open, thick strands of golden sap dripping onto the floor as something inside began to emerge. The moth loomed over them, its wings fluttering faintly, stirring the air in the chamber. One by one, the cocoons tore open, revealing creatures that were almost human. They bore the same dark fuzz covering their bodies, limbs elongated and strong, and their black eyes shone like polished mirrors. They moved with a terrifying grace, stepping forward in unison, their heads tilting as they absorbed their surroundings. For the first time, the moth stirred, its wings spreading wide as it emitted a low, resonant hum that reverberated through the walls. The hybrids turned toward the sound, their heads bowing in perfect synchrony. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life, a panicked voice shouting orders that he couldn't quite decipher. The higher-ups must have realized the gravity of the situation because the chamber was flooded with gas. Yet the hybrids didn't flinch. They turned toward the door, moving as one, and he felt a sinking dread wash over him as he realized they still remembered the access codes. He remained frozen in the security room, time stretching endlessly as he stared at the monitors. Everything spiraled out of control. The hybrids were everywhere now, gliding through the facility as if they had designed it themselves. They weren't rushing or scrambling. No, they moved with chilling purpose, room to room, hallway to hallway, methodically and terrifyingly precise. It was as if they didn't need to check. They already knew where everyone was located. He could feel the air tightening around him, thick with tension. It wasn't just the hybrids or the blaring alarms. It was the overwhelming sense that something monumental was unfolding, and he was powerless to stop it. It was the moth. Even from this distance, he could sense its presence pressing down on him, as if it were watching through the cameras, through the walls, through him. His hands trembled so violently that he struggled to keep them steady on the console. He couldn't afford to linger. The ICD would soon sweep through, likely trying to assess the entire facility hybrids or not. If he stayed, he faced either death or a scrambled memory, just another loose end tied off. His eyes darted across the monitors, searching desperately for any site that wasn't crawling with hybrids or swarming with cleanup teams. That's when he spotted them, the maintenance tunnels. Old and barely used, they weren't part of the standard patrol routes and had remained untouched by the hybrids. He slipped out of the security room, his heart pounding like a war drum. The corridors bathed in an eerie red glow from the emergency lights cast flickering shadows along the walls. His boots barely made a sound as he moved, but every little creak and faint hum of the facility's systems sent jolts of anxiety through him. He could feel his pulse throbbing in his throat, thick and heavy, drowning out everything else. The air felt different down here. The facility's usual sterile tang was still present, but now a sharper, metallic edge clung to everything. The walls, the floor, his skin. His head spun and his stomach churned, yet he pressed on. The access ladder to maintenance level 3 loomed ahead. When he reached it, he hesitated, his hand hovering over the cold metal rungs. Climbing down felt like stepping into a grave, but what choice did he have? He gripped the ladder tightly, beginning his descent. The faint squeak of his boots and the rungs echoed in the shaft, each sound amplified, reverberating back at him tenfold. The maintenance tunnels were worse than he remembered, tight, damp, and shrouded in darkness. His flashlight barely pierced the blackness, the beam wobbling as his hand trembled. The air grew thicker, heavy with the scent of rust and stagnant water. The faint hum of the pipes whispered ominously in the background. The service hatch wasn't far, just at the end of the corridor, a faint sliver of moonlight visible through the cracks. He quickened his pace, his boots splashing through shallow puddles, the sound unnervingly loud in the oppressive silence. His breath came in ragged gasps now, sharp against his chest, but he kept his eyes fixed on the hatch. It was so close he could almost taste the fresh air waiting on the other side. Then he heard a soft clicking sound, faint at first, like nails tapping on metal. He swung his flashlight wildly toward the noise, the beam catching a shadow that shouldn't be there. His stomach dropped as one of the hybrids stepped into the light, its black, mirror-like eyes reflecting the beam back at him, tightening his chest with dread. Its head tilted slowly, deliberately, as if it were studying him, weighing its next move. He didn't want to find out. He ran. The hatch was just a few feet away, but it felt like miles. The clicking behind him grew louder, faster, almost rhythmic, matching the frantic beat of his footsteps. His lungs burned, and his legs screamed in protest, but he didn't stop. He collided with the hatch, his hands fumbling for the release lever, fingers slick with sweat. The hybrid was right behind him. He could feel its presence crawling up his spine like static electricity. With a desperate heave, he yanked the lever. The hatch swung open, and the cold night air hit him like a slap. He scrambled through, hitting the ground hard, palms scraping against the rough dirt. Breathless, he twisted around and slammed the hatch shut, locking the emergency mechanism into place, just as something heavy slammed against the other side. The metal groaned, vibrating under the force of the hybrid's blows. He stumbled back, his legs barely holding him up, and turned toward the forest. The trees loomed like dark sentinels, their branches clawing at the sky, moonlight barely penetrating the dense canopy. He didn't wait, he didn't think, he just ran. In the past, there were truly terrifying experiments on zombie soldiers conducted in a secret bunker by the Japanese fascists. Are you curious? Leave a comment below. Thanks for watching until the end. See you next time.